I'm Tasneem Essop, and you're listening to Just Access, The Real Transition, a podcast from PARI, the Public Affairs Research Institute. This is episode 4. In the previous episode, we explored how land tenure, dispossession, and the right to say no shaped the justice of South Africa's energy transition. We heard how communities with insecure land rights are often the first to absorb the costs of development, even when that development is labeled green. In this episode, we move closer to the ground. We look at how land is actually governed and allocated in practice, and the role that municipalities play as climate change, infrastructure development, and settlement pressures collide. Because this is where the transition becomes real, where national ambitions meet local land, local people, and local power. In this episode, we return to Dr. Gaynor Paradza from PARI's Land Governance Program and her colleague Daniel Scheer, a researcher focusing on land tenure and governance. Just staying with this topic of municipalities and their role in the just transition or in the energy transition, what are some of the, probably at this stage, ad hoc ways that municipalities are unlocking land for development, and how can these processes be improved?
So, for example, municipalities are responsible for distributing land. Like if you want land to make, I keep saying wind farm, or if a community wants to do a sustainable vegetable garden, or it's a community that is flood prone, they need to be moved from the floodplain to a higher place. Municipalities have been responding in the same way that they've always done things. So, for example, if you go there with your proposal for a project to do a solar farm, they will process you the way they've always done. Or if they have some prime land that they need to allocate between the different users, say the community from a floodplain, or people who have lost their jobs, who need somewhere to stay, versus a business that wants to make an investment in alternative energy production. Municipalities, I will say ad hoc, historical way of dealing with this is that they dispose of land on like an economic basis. So the highest bidder on many terms will get the land. And yet, land is more than just an economic asset. It's also the space where, for example, in South Africa, we're trying to achieve spatial justice from historical times. So if we keep using the money, the rand, as a way of distributing the land, the have-nots continue to be the have-nots. And what we're getting is an unjust transition versus a just transition where Municipal Finances Act allows municipalities to have social considerations when it is allocating land. And also another example from where we've been working in Middelburg, when we ask them how do they give out land, it's like an ad hoc. So if an investor comes and they want, 5 hectares, they get the 5 hectares. The next person comes, they want 2 hectares. There is a lack of systematic decision that land is a finite resource. And municipality owns land, private property on land, some informal settlements are on land. How do you make sure all this is done? How do we prioritize, for example? Because I think now the database on South Africa climate vulnerability shows which areas are prone to floods, prone to droughts, where people cannot live there. I have not seen, I don't know if you have an example of municipality where they're now proactively putting this into their land use planning. What you hear is, do you have emergency halls and tents? Like, how long do people stay in a tent? And you've seen the pictures of flooded settlements. People can't go back to there. So they then go further and further away, or they become what we call the informal settlers. But this is a humanitarian crisis. I don't yet see how municipalities are responding. But that is some of their role in how they're deploying land use.
I think a couple of points to add on that also is just to say, municipalities have all these spatial planning and development frameworks. I mentioned the IDP, there's also spatial development frameworks. And a lot of them are quite long-term documents, so they aren't necessarily up to date with the kind of emphasis on renewable energy or transition. And municipalities aren't necessarily always sure how to, what are the zoning restrictions around these new industries that are developing. So they, very much deciding on a case-by-case basis. Another issue is that a lot of these municipalities don't hold a lot of land, but other government entities may, national government departments or state-owned companies. But the process of transferring land between entities and then disposing of state land, should a project demand it, is extremely slow, extremely bureaucratic. And this has been something that officials have told us time and time again, that this is just not working. They're not able to leverage that land for impactful projects, whether it's, a housing project or a renewable energy project.
And staying with that, there are multiple levels of government and institutions involved in aspects of the energy transition, particularly as it relates to new projects that are quite large scale. And as you said, with contracts signed and negotiated, not even just in South Africa. What is the level of interaction between these different government departments, levels of government? What are some of the challenges there? And if there are any, what's working at that level?
Yeah, you're right. So, for example, the mandate for holding land is mostly held at provincial level and national level, not so much at the municipal level. The municipality has some responsibility. And like you said, I think we did some research 3 years ago where we found, for example, the Lephalale municipality only controls 2% of its land. Bushbuck Ridge was 6%. I think the one that's hit like the most, I think it's Ekurhuleni in that sample hit like 12%. So the rest of the land is held by entities other than municipality, which is private owners. It's also provincial government, which is the Department of Public Works owns most of the land, and rural development and land reform. I think human settlements. So the municipality does not have that control over that land, but it is responsible for overseeing and supporting the implementation of, for example, developments on that land. And the way in which we have been working, we've observed that in terms of the transition, municipalities are kind of marginalized. First, I said they are not involved in the signing of the deals. They are also, for example, people talk a lot about climate finance. Those deals do not involve municipalities. And they said when it does come, it is in the way of loans. And they're borrowed up to here. They don't have any more appetite to borrow, so they don't participate. And then, like Daniel says, to transfer land from one government entity to another, it's a molehill. It's an insurmountable task for municipalities. I mean, we have been in meetings where the Department of Rural Development, State Lands Office, they call themselves state property or something. We were talking to them and they said, no, we have a lot of land. Municipalities can get land for free. They can buy it or they can get it as donated property. And they said they don't come forward. But the municipalities are asking, even in meetings where both that Provincial Office of Rural Development has been in a meeting with the municipalities, and the guys asked to articulate what is the process. He says, you cannot articulate a process. Or he said, it's already too late for this year. And he said, can you come and tell us how the work goes so that next year we can actually apply for this land? For our own example, we were in the person's office and we said, can we see the form that they're supposed to fill? Because that's how government things work. So we can follow. They don't have. So it looks like even at that level, either it's ad hoc or if you go to the wider land reform issue, there's a reluctance by government to cede land to other entities besides itself at a central and a provincial level, which puts the municipalities in a very difficult position. So one of the things that we saw, which is kind of promising, I don't know about working, is that there are vulnerable people who have no land. When the mines closed down, they moved because they don't have a job. So they are now in urban areas and they're poor. In Sibandi, in Mpumalanga, there's an initiative called a Mayoral Gardens Initiative, which is aimed at giving people access to land so that they can at least, I think, meet their subsistence needs. So, but I said it's still a work in progress. And we are going to go in and try and support them because I believe when those projects happen, whether supported by UN, EU, people get agricultural inputs. But there is little thought about What are the terms on which they're accessing that land? Beyond the project, can they continue to be on that land? Can they go to Absa Bank, for example, or FNB and borrow money to put an infrastructure on that land? It looks like that kind of stuff does not come into the discussion. So that's some of the stuff that we are working on revealing and putting on the table so it can be taken into consideration.
Just to add one other thing which is encouraging, regarding sort of intergovernmental relations, it's almost a kind of truism that government doesn't talk to itself. But one thing we have seen is that DFFE, the Department of Fishery, Forestries and the Environment, is working with municipalities to help them develop their climate risk and vulnerability assessments and then their implementation plans. So, these processes are at an early stage for the kind of level of urgency of the kind of need around, but they are encouraging.
Given all of this that we've spoken about, tell me about some of the interventions that you propose, particularly in relation to secure land rights and the just energy transition.
So when we were doing some work with the municipalities and asking them, what do they know about transition? What do they know about the role of land? For example, we had a waste management manager in one of the local municipalities say, go and talk to the town planner. I've got nothing to do with the land here. So we had to explain to him that the waste management is happening on land. The same with people in environment, the people working on cemetery, they'll be like, no, we're not the land people. So I think the intervention is to raise the awareness of everybody in the local authorities or nationally. The transition is a land issue because the damage, the response, the adaptation, mitigation is all happening on land. So you cannot have a conversation about just transition and not talk about land. In that conversation, you cannot just talk about land as an economic asset. It is also the space where human beings are going to have to mitigate and manage. And not everybody has got runs and cents. And at the same time, we cannot get carried away and forget the historical issues that South Africa has not even begun to address about land dispossession. We have to frame the transition land packaging in such a way that it does not further disenfranchise and marginalize those who were already marginalized. And if there are costs and benefits of transition, it should be such that those who are causing the damage, like the miners, like the people who clear the forest and put a commercial farm, they must pay the cost of restoration, not it becomes a problem for everybody that must be involved in restoring the land.
I think also, it's worth noting that municipalities often really struggle to engage with land rights holders whose rights are, off register, that they're not recorded in the deeds registry. And there's a huge need for capacity building and learning around this issue. The information systems are incomplete. Different information about different landholders is held at so many different levels. But, there are a myriad of different kind of interventions within processes and decision-making flows that can be made. But really the kind of overarching question that needs to be asked is, who's on this land? What do they need?
Yeah, transition is about land. There is no just transition without land. If land is not in the conversation, I would say the transition is necessarily unjust.
What powers the transition isn't only the wind or the sun, it is the land beneath them. And if we don't ask who controls that land, who benefits from it, and who is excluded, we risk reproducing the very injustices the transition claims to address. The just transition is not only an energy story, it is a story of belonging, voice, and justice, told through the ground we all stand on. In our next episode, we turn to the role of the state and ask, what happens when the institutions that are meant to lead the transition are themselves in crisis? I'm Tasneem Essop, and you've been listening to Just Access, The Real Transition, a podcast from PARI, the Public Affairs Research Institute. To learn more about PARI and their research, visit pari.org.za. If you found this episode useful, please like, follow, or subscribe and share it with others. And keep listening.